Hello and welcome to round 6 of the Motogp Xtra podcast, the Spanish GP at Jerez. I'm Rhys, and joining me as usual to discuss the events of the race weekend is Dylan, aka Dill469. So first thing we're actually going to talk about is actually something that happened on Sunday morning, and it's our favourite topic, the MotoGP stewards. We always have to talk about them at some point because they always do something, and we actually thought we weren't going to have to talk about them because they'd actually been alright all weekend until this crash this morning. So Ortola got knocked off, or there was a bit of a collision between Riccardo Rossi and Ivan Ortola in the braking zone down towards the Dani Pedrosa corner. And then Ortola's unmanned bike hit into the side of Joel Kelso, which it was a bit of a weird incident. The footage of it's not great. It cuts quite late, so it's difficult to see what happened. And as usual, the stewards made a bit of a meal of it. So, yeah, pretty much the standard there. So apparently they said to Riccardo Rossi that they didn't find him at fault, but then they also still gave him a penalty. So what do you think of this, Dylan? It's the stewards once again.
So I'm going to start off by saying I'm very glad Joel Kelso is okay, because if anyone has seen the weird wonky footage, it's a hell of an impact. And it's a scary one when you see it first, because the bike just absolutely T-bones him, and it's an awful impact, and it's good that he's okay and doesn't have any lasting injuries. But we're getting all this from Twitter. Simon Patterson, who's a brilliant MotoGP journalist, tweeted saying, "I don't understand the MotoGP sanctions, blah, blah, blah." Riccardo Rossi replied to him saying how basically Race Direction said, "Look, we reviewed it. At first glance, we thought it was a penalty. We gave you a penalty. We gave you 2 long lap penalties." Then he said, "Well, I did nothing wrong." They agree with him. Go, "Yeah, we actually can see from this camera angles that we can't see. We only have it's kind of like a panning camera. It just turns just after there's contact, so you don't really see how the contact came about. You just see a bike on a missile track to the side of Joel Kelso." But basically, he said, yeah, the stewards were like, "Yeah, we agree with you. You didn't do anything wrong. We'll knock off 1 long lap penalty." And he's like, "Why don't I get my penalty removed?" He goes, "Well, we need to penalise someone to stop people from weaving on the straight and set an example." So he's done nothing wrong, and he ended up crashing out of the race. Spoiler alert, unfortunately, he had a bad race. The long lap penalty didn't help, but they gave him a penalty just to penalise someone for the incident. It's mind-boggling. It's a joke between me and Rhys at this point that when we start the podcast, we have to get the stewards' corner out and we have to go through everything they've done wrong. And before we set up this podcast, we were like, geez, they actually haven't done anything this weekend. They were pretty good. Everything was normal. Any penalty that they gave was right. Like, they gave penalties in qualifying for riders dawdling. Everything seemed okay. And then they go and do this Sunday morning. They went and they ruined it. Like, that was just mindless. Like, I understand where they're coming from, where we have to set a standard for weaving on a straight. But penalising someone who hasn't done anything wrong to set an example is not the right way to go about it. So Riccardo Rossi's weekend was ruined. It makes no sense. It does no sense to it. Really annoying. I'm still annoyed about it now, because not only did it affect his race, but is this what the season is going to be like? Oh, we had an incident last week, so next week Suzuki's getting a penalty if he does something silly. Like, it just, where's the consistency to it? It's wrong. It's wrong, really, and it's annoying, and you can probably tell I'm very passionate about it. And the weekend was going well. I was not after making any predictions for the stewards to make a stupid decision. They had to go and ruin it Sunday. And we can hope for Le Mans. We'll try again in Le Mans. We'll see how they do in Le Mans. I don't hold my breath, though.
Yeah, and the reason they gave also makes no sense, because they don't penalise people for weaving on the straight. That's why it still happens. But yeah. I guess it's, we don't know what they do up there. But either way, then let's enough about that. Let's head into the actual race itself. And there's one thing that I did actually want to note, something that we did mention last week, that we were saying that the KTM in Moto 3 is starting to look like a bit of a better package than the Honda, because the front group was all KTMs and the Hondas were pretty far behind, and that seemed to continue this week. And I actually have down here sort of the factory KTMs, because with the IO bike at the front, which obviously that is probably the factory KTM team, even though technically I suppose everybody has the same equipment, but there is still that team that's literally in the same colours as the MotoGP factory team. Same with the Tech 3 one. Then you've got the 2 Gas bikes. Well, that's technically the official Gas team. You also then had one of the CF Moto bikes up there as well, and a Husqvarna, which is the same thing as the 2 Gas bikes. So it's almost as if like maybe it is partly down to the fact that maybe those teams do have slightly better equipment, being the actual official versions of the team. But even still, the KTM bike seems to be a little bit better. What did you think of the sort of poor performance for the Hondas this weekend?
Yeah, it's quite a good point, because KTM are clever in that sense, and again we can go over the KTM branches over Husqvarna, CF Moto, and GasCas, and it's quite clever if you think about it. If it goes, we're going to deploy 4 different manufacturers and we're going to make them 4 factory teams, whereas Honda really, they supply everyone with the same kit. Nobody is a factory team, as you could say Leopard is, but it's just Leopard seem to have the best mechanics and probably the data miners for figuring out the best engine maps, the best this, that and the other, and they set the bike up the best. Whereas the IO team, the GasCas, the Husqvarna, like Max Racing, like they're all really good teams, and they all seem to have a really well dialed in bike. So once again in the Moto3 race, I think top Honda was Scott Ogden in P12. I think maybe did Mino pass them towards the end. They were pretty much, there wasn't a Honda. Scott was top, yeah, so I was right. But there wasn't a Honda in the top 10. There was one in qualifying. Foggia qualified in front row. He went backwards. Now, we don't have a confirmation exactly what, but we do suspect that he had some sort of engine braking issue that he was pushing into the corner. He was seconds off the pace. He finished outside the points in P16, which for his championship challenge is just not good enough. Now, again, if it was some sort of ECU glitch or some sort of mechanical, it can happen, but I don't think, even at that, I don't think he was going to be battling Masia, Anshu, Sasaki and the rest for the win, the 2 Grassinis or the 2 GasCas bikes as well. I just don't think he had the pace. He looks like he's struggling. Now, it could be down to the equipment, but last year as well, he went through this period where Pedro wiped the floor with him and he was kind of nowhere, and then he got back into it. Again, it seemed like, oh, the championship is gone now, I can kind of ride, whereas now everyone is like, oh, Fudge, it's a championship, we might just give him the trophy, and he looks like he's struggling with that. I believe he's going to struggle this year if he doesn't turn his form. And now we're going to Le Mans, then we go to Mugello, Catalunya. There's not tracks where you go, oh, I'm going to have an advantage there. Like, Garcia is going to be crazy at Catalunya. You have a couple of Italians in Moto3 for Mugello. There's Ricciardo, a few others will do well at Le Mans, so there's no easy races for him. So if he's going to struggle this much early on, you could nearly rule him out of the championship, which is a shame, because he's a bit of a weird one. He's done well when he's been against it, and then when it's his time to shine, he looks like could be a mental thing. I don't know exactly, but we'll see going forward. But for now, keep a close eye on Foggia. I don't know exactly what is going wrong in that team, and they have history, which is the sad part, really.
Yeah, it wasn't a fantastic weekend for Foggia. Even before the race, obviously, like you say, did seem to have an issue because he dropped back. He was passed by all the other Honda riders. I mean, they were at the back, except Riccardo Rossi. Riccardo Rossi was the only Honda that was doing decent until, of course, he fell off. But yeah, not a great weekend for Foggia. But whilst we're talking about the Leopard team, let's move on to his teammate Suzuki. Once again, he crashed out of the race, didn't he? So that's something he does. He's made a habit of that throughout his Moto3 career. And there were a lot of question marks when he picked up the ride in the first place. Did he really deserve it? How did he get it? It's been rumoured that, maybe Honda had something to do with it, put a Japanese rider in the best Honda team. And, I mean, yeah, right, maybe he had the same problem as Foggia. As it turned out, that could potentially be the case. But even still, Foggia didn't crash, and Suzuki's also not been good enough at other weekends this season. So what do you think of Tatsuki's performance?
Woeful. I've been pretty vocal about him. I've been pretty vocal about him not deserving that seat. And when I got announced that day, I remember seeing him being signed on. I was like, what? This is just it's wrong. Like, again, I understand Honda want a Japanese rider on their best bike for many reasons. But it is pretty clear at his time with the 658 team that he was unbelievable over one lap. And occasionally, maybe 1 in 8 races, he could put a race together. But he was known for crashing out of top 8 positions on regular occasions. That was one of his biggest issues when he was alongside, I think, Antonelli at the time in that category, in that team. But he crashed so much. He had the potential to do one hell of a lap in qualifying. And then he goes into the best team, without question, the best team in Moto3. They by far seem to have the most strongest bike in there. Now this year it looked like Honda, the manufacturer, maybe have got it wrong with the bike, and the KTMs, we'll call them, have made a big step. But you would say that Leopard are the most consistent. They won the championship with Mir back in 16, I believe it was, and he dominated that year, and he was really quick, and he just looked like he had something over the rest. A bit like Foggia last year, but this year it's gone horribly wrong. Both of them have been off. It's Suzuki. Oh, I don't know what's next for him, because there's no signs of life from him in this season at the moment. He's been nowhere. Like, he's struggling to get out of Q1. He's crashing like he's always crashed. So maybe it's just really bad time for Tatsuki that he's gone to Honda when Honda are just gone over the peak and are on the way back down, and they're in a bit of a transition period, and he's trying his best and he's crashing his brains out. But if I was a Moto3 boss, I wouldn't really be taking a punt on Suzuki, knowing his history. So I feel sorry for him. I do believe Foggia will sort it out eventually. I fear for him in the championship. I think the two the Gas boys, the Sergio Garcia Asper, yes, I keep calling him Grassini. The Asper boys are ridiculously quick. They just seem to have everything absolutely perfect. I believe they will be pretty hard to beat in the championship. I have question marks over Messia's head, whether he'll be able to do it for a season. Third podium this weekend, great result. Seemed good in the battle, but a whole season, I reckon he might fall away. But Foggia for now, and Suzuki, I don't see either of them winning races anytime soon.
No, yeah, it's just not good enough. And like you said, I can't see any of the teams taking a punt on him, especially when there's young talent constantly coming through. So we could potentially be seeing Suzuki's last season, but I suppose we'll see how the rest of the year pans out. But one thing I actually did want to talk about as well was sort of the battle at the front, the final lap. Obviously, you were saying the two gas bikes looking really strong, and they were. But what a win from Guevara. What a move around the outside to that final turn. Never really seen anything like it, to be honest. And everyone was sort of battling over the inside. He just broke late, round the outside of everybody. He go from about fourth? Or was it third?
Fourth.
Either way, I mean, he passed like three people into that last corner and took the win. It was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, that move was actually happened once before in a World Superbike race back in 2013. Eugene Laverty did it around the outside of Marco Melandri, and at the time people went crazy about it, and people were like, oh, well, Melandri got that all wrong, there's no way he should be able to do it. But it is an actual potential move, because everybody remembers Rossi gibbering out into that corner, Marquez, Lorenzo. There's probably another 100 I won't be able to mention this one because of how they've ended. Everybody knows that you have to kind of go defensive. They will try it. You come through Ferrari, which is a corner before, and it just invites you corner speed into it. You just want to leave the brake off. Guevara was just brilliant. If you watch it back, there's a helicopter cam of it. He comes out of Ferrari, instantly goes to the right side of the track, as if it's like he already had it planned, or it was mentally. It had the whereabouts to kind of figure it out right at the time. It wasn't that like they got it all so wrong that he just happened to manage to go around the outside. He purposely went right out to the white line to brake late to go around the outside. And Anshu, who was leading, got really screwed over. He went from first to fourth and got beaten up by the factory IO bike of Nasia to the drag to the line. So I do believe if he was going to win, though, he would have gotten that taken off. He came out of the stadium section and was very close to the track limits. Now, whether he did or not, I don't know. I don't think they penalised him. That might be an issue, because I do believe he touched the green, but I don't think he got a penalty, and that's kind of wrong, because just because he lost the positions doesn't mean the penalty is not void. It's again kind of lackluster stewarding. But that last corner was brilliant, and the fact there was contact, but they all seem to get through it cleanly. Moto3 this year seems better for the contact. There's not as much. Like this time last year, we were just every week we were like, oh my god, I can't believe they've taken each other out again. There's too much of this, there's too much of that. It seems like the front guys have more this year, and that's pulling the field slightly further apart, which means certain people can hang on, and it's not such big battles. So overall, I'm really enjoying Moto3 this year. Some people are saying the racing isn't as good. The racing's safer, which from a fan is a big thing, and someone who watches it so regularly, I'm happy. It's not as chaotic. Not every corner is there 3 overtakes, and that's okay. I think last year was over the line. There was too much going on. There was too many incidents. There's too many red flags. So the fact that this year it seems better, and we've had some brilliant last corner, last lap battles, and I'm overall enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot more this year. I'm not as nervous watching Moto3.
Yeah, that's actually a good point you mentioned about the front guys having a little bit more, actually leaving everybody else. That's not something I particularly actually thought about so much. Obviously, I was noticed more that the KTMs are pulling away, but yeah, the actual top riders seem to be the same riders week in, week out, which isn't always the case in Moto3, are the ones actually getting the top positions. The faster riders do seem to be able to pull away a little bit more this year, so that is actually quite interesting. But we'll move on to Moto2 now then, and we may as well get out of the way something that's quite disappointing. The British riders, they looked like they were going to be very, very fast based off the free practice. And actually, I had got down after qualifying, because we make notes throughout the weekend, that I was actually going to mention Sam Lowe's sort of being back on form because he qualified so well. But sadly, he was back on form. So we all know how that ends. And sadly, he crashed. And then, was it even about a lap later, maybe? Jake Dixon also crashed, making a move on Aldeguer into the last corner. Now, at least for Lowe's, that's the first mistake we've really seen from him all season. But Dixon, this is 2 in a row, third this season. It's not really good enough. The pace is there, but the consistency is not. And taking out another rider as well is never what you want to do.
Yeah, Sam was P3 and he believed himself he could have got pole on Saturday. He did say he got held up by his teammate and said he just kind of got flustered towards the end of the session. Got a bad start, again, trademark. Had contact with Chantra, I believe it was, into turn one. He had
Chantra at turn one.
He had to sit it up and he went backwards. And to be fair, for a few laps, I was kind of watching him and goes, this is typical Sam Lowe's. He'll start P2, P3, bad start, kind of get beaten up, be P7, and he'll finish P5. But he actually, at a point of the race where it's kind of not usual, he managed to make places up in the first 6 or 7 laps, got back into the group, and I was thinking, this is going too well for Sam. This is going far too well. And managed to pass Chantra, and then, of course, he tipped off in Aspar, I think it was, turn 8. So,
yeah, I think that's Aspar.
Again, the biggest issue was the track temperatures were, for the Moto2 race, was the hottest it had been all weekend. The Brits, if history stands to repeat itself, always struggle when the temperature gets hot. They don't grow up on 45, 50 degree tracks in Donington and the Holton Park. You just don't see that temperature there. The Italians, the Spanish, the French, they all have that knack for when the bike is moving and they don't have grip, they can still keep it rubber side down. They can two-wheel drift around the track, whereas from what I've seen over the last 5 years, the Britons can't do it. They just don't have it. When the track is cold, when there's low grip and everything's like that, then they're there. When it's wet, they're there. They have their best situations. But with the World Championship, and we're going through now, Jerez, Le Mans, Mugello, Catalunya, Assen, they're all going to be 30 degrees plus for most of them races, bar maybe the odd one, make it a wet one in Assen is a common one.
Le Mans will probably be cold.
Yeah, maybe Le Mans.
Usually
yeah, usually Le Mans is either ice cold or it's like hot with a bit of a breeze. So we'll see. Again, you could see the British. There could be a double podium next week for the Brits if it's cold there. They're limited by the temperature of the track a lot of the time. It's disappointing because Sam Lowe's is in arguably the best team in Moto2. You could say the IO team, maybe last year's champions.
Well, they're struggling this year, really.
And yeah, they're not really on it this year.
Yes, are looking better.
So you would say, again, you look back at, they had Mika Kallio, they had Rabat, they had lots of championship caliber riders. They won a good few championships. Oh yeah, I forgot about him. And another Brit who crashes brains.
What he's up to nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. How's that BMW feel? But he just crashes when, like, he crashed out of P4. Like, it's not like he was 2 seconds off the lead and 2/10 away and each lap was building. I made a joke before the podcast that Sam Lowe's will be in P2 5 seconds from the lead, 5 seconds from third place. He'll take a 10th out for 2 laps now and then he'll bin it. There's just like, you're like, geez, were you really going to make up a 10th every lap for 50 laps to win it? No, you weren't. You weren't going to do it. You just should have stuck to your pace. Now, Neil Hodgson said, look, he did nothing wrong. On a track like that, you could say that you did nothing wrong. He probably did the exact same thing, but it does seem like Sam does it more often than the others. Chester Vietti did not have the pace to say he didn't crash. So you could say the same about Iagora. It was the same for him. Why didn't he crash if he did nothing wrong? There's going to be minute mistakes, and that's where Sam, for me, he'll never be a champion in Moto2, unfortunately. He won't be able to put a whole season together or the top level against these current crop of riders.
Yeah, it does look that way. So a bit of a shame there for Sam Lowes. But on a bit more of a positive note, we'll talk about someone that did an amazing job this weekend, and not actually the race winner, but Aaron Canet. I mean, how did he do that? How did he get second place after the surgery he had? Because after the last race, where there was a weird crash due to the rain, everyone falling off, he managed to injure, was it the radius bone, I think?
Yeah.
Is what he injured. He had to have surgery on that on the Monday, then he's back on the bike by Friday. All weekend I was impressed with him. Again, like I had written down for Lowe's after qualifying, I had the same thing written down for Canet, that what a job he did to grit his teeth. But then even better in the race. I mean, it's one thing to do it over one lap. We've seen it done in the past before. We saw it with Marquez a few times last year. He could put one lap together when he was injured, but to actually do it over that whole race distance, and to be honest, he looked fairly comfortable. He got overtaken by Arbolino at one point, was able to fight back through, so he never dropped back through. So fantastic job, fantastic job from Canet there.
Yeah, just to explain the injury a bit more, in Portimao, he high-sided on the rain, but he got dragged back onto the bike, and going through the gravel, he broke the orbital bone in his arm. Basically, if you look at your forearm, that bone that runs through your forearm, he had a plate and 7 or 8 screws drilled into it, so the strength and the rigidity of your bone is completely gone, which means you can't really put pressure on it. And Jerez is a very stop-start track in the first sector. Then it's really flowing, where you're constantly hanging off the bike. It's a physical track. It's known as a physical track, even though it's a smaller track, but it's such a physical track. The fact that he managed to do a full race distance and keep in second, he came across the line, instantly his hand dropped, and he was just in agony. He came into Parc Ferme, tears, couldn't take his helmet off, couldn't take his glove off, could barely talk to Natalie Quirk in the interviews, had absolutely no voice. It was just one of those, you see him every couple of years, those historic rides where riders have given it everything and then some. And the fact though that he rode that well, like, he has yet to win a race in Moto 2, which is a crime in my opinion. He's been second a few times, probably could have won last time out, could have won in Texas, but they just slipped through his fingers. And put through that good of a ride in them conditions, greasy, so easy to make a mistake. Iagora was on fire and he managed to stick with him for most of the race. A crazy ride from him. You can only take your hat off to him. It was brilliant. I'm so happy for him though that he didn't struggle more this weekend, but his pace was there and somehow he managed to physically pull himself through it. It was brilliant. You can only take your hat off to the young man.
Yeah, it was an extremely, extremely impressive performance, and the performance of a championship contender, really, to do well on the off weekends. And as you briefly mentioned there, Agora was absolutely on fire this weekend, pole position and the race win. It's been coming for a while for Agora, and I think after the win for Chantra back in Indonesia, he's really wanted to get that win, but he's not overpushed it. He's kept cool and calm, as he always has throughout his whole career, even in Moto 3. He always looked really calm in the groups, and Elias the flag victory, no mistakes at all. I didn't see him make a single mistake throughout the race. It was just an amazing performance.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Iagora. I have been for a while. I'm really excited by the prospect of him moving to MotoGP. I remember a couple of years back when he was in the Moto 3 class, I was really gunning for him in that title battle against Alberto Reyes, and unfortunately, it didn't go his way. He was the kind of consistent man that year. He hadn't won any races. It's actually his first race win in all categories, not just Moto 2. A lot of people don't believe that he hadn't won a race in Moto 3. But there's something about him. He rides, he's a bit of a smaller fellow, we could say. And a lot like the Japanese riders, they really hang off it. He wears a classic Arai helmet. He has the 74 on one shoulder and the number 48, a great tribute to the Jaro Kato and Showa Tomazawa, two Japanese riders who we've lost in the last 25 years in the sport. He's just a class act. He's very hard on himself though, which is weird. It's probably the Japanese mentality. I remember a few times this year he's had podiums. He's like, well, I wanted to win, so we're not satisfied yet. And he's finally got it, and he smiled today and he was happy and he was joking around. There's just something about his riding style. He reminds me of Danny Pedrosa a bit. Again, same stature, the RI, the way he gets off and uses his body. Oh, he's a class act. I can't wait to see him in GP, and I truly believe he will probably, maybe around Aston Germany time, we'll hear that he will be replacing Taka Nakagami in the Moto 2 class, or MotoGP class, I should say.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if that deal's not already done. It's probably a formality now. It is around about this time that we get some contracts negotiations. So that might be something interesting that we get to talk about on maybe the next episode. Perhaps there'll be some contracts, something like that. But we may as well talk about the championship leader then, Celestino Vietti. And this weekend, he didn't really seem to have the pace at all. He struggled a lot. But again, like you said earlier, he did bring home the points, which again is a champion's ride. But there was something that I'm a little bit concerned about. Now, that's kind of 2 weekends in a row where he's not really had the pace. He got very lucky in Portimao, really, that he managed to get that second place. Because if you think about it, the top 9 crashed effectively. So you put him behind those 9 people. He's outside the top 10 there. So it wasn't a great, he didn't really have that much pace in Portimao. And then again here, he seemed to be struggling as well. Are we potentially seeing a case of it was the first few races that were a bit weird that maybe helped him out? Or it's just maybe just a little bit of a blip and he'll be back for Le Mans next week?
It's still very early to say, but I will say I picked him at the start of the season, my dark horse. It was his rookie year last year. He struggled at first. He took a while to adapt to the Moto 2 Kalex bike. Towards the end of the year, he was consistently top 8, and he had a few chances at a podium, and he was making step by step, and he was getting there slow, and he looked like he was on the right track. So that's why I picked him this year as my dark horse. I never expected him to be that quick in the first 4 rounds. I had in my mind that until we get to the European rounds, we can't really call him a championship favourite. And you can go, well, he's been quickest, he's been the fastest man. That's great, but every race up until now has been a bit of a odd race. We've either had bad weather, we've had a new track, or we've had tracks we haven't raced at in years, or we've had a motocross track or a night race. None of them are your classic Spanish, Italian, German, middle of summertime race. They're weird times, weird weather, really humid, really this, that, and there are lots of things going on. Really dirty track for Argentina, track that hadn't been used in 3 years. So there's always coming into it. It was never just as simple as who was the fastest guy, who was the best guy. It was, okay, who's going to make the best of a track that's going to clean up on Sunday? Who's going to make the best of not having that extra day on Friday? Who's going to be able to have the bike best set up for the bumps of Kota? Who's going to have the best of Qatar's race? It was always question marks. So I think he was very good at the start of the season. I still have my doubts whether, I hate to say it as well because I'm a big fan of him. I really like another guy I really like watching. I still think he is a question mark over whether he's going to do it this year. Le Mans Mugello, I think after we see the two of them, if he's again P9, P7 in Mugello, I think he's going to be a top 3 in the championship, maybe top 5 at worst. But I believe that Canet, he seems quick everywhere. And again today, he probably could have won, maybe challenged Igor if he didn't have the injury. He probably would have had that extra bit of strength to push forward. There's a couple of other riders you could bring into it, whereas Vietti looks like he's slightly starting to misfire small. But no, again, he's got very lucky in Portimao. The fact that he was qualified badly, was further back, kind of got to turn 2 as the red flags came out, stayed on, brought home a podium in the red flagged second race. So everything was rosy there. Again, he got lucky. Bad mistake in Texas. Again, I think that was down to the wind, which is the same as Canet. So again, we're going back to weird conditions, weird tracks, things like that can happen. But again, this weekend there was never a point where we go, oh yeah, he's got it, he's figured it out, he has the race pace, oh he's trying out a different tyre. He just literally looked like he didn't have the pace, which at a track that if you go well at Jerez, you kind of go well everywhere else. So the fact that he isn't there, I still have my doubts for Le Mans. I still believe he's going to be very strong throughout the season. In certain races he'll probably do a Lorenzo, disappear. But will it be enough? Will he have too many off days is my question at the moment. I still can't say for sure. I'm hoping it was just he didn't have the feeling this weekend and maybe Portimao was another one of them and we see him back on form in Le Mans, but only time will tell.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's just the first few races were a little bit strange. So we'll move on to MotoGP now. And the first thing I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to was that qualifying session, because what was that? That was almost like a qualifying session in terms of the lap times from 10 years ago. Pecco Bagnaia was on pole by 0.4. Was it 0.4 of a second, I think, in the end? Yeah, it was on pole by ahead of Fabio Quartararo. You never see that nowadays. You get 0.4 covering the top 10 most of the time. That was like a Casey Stoner-style pole, like miles ahead of everybody else. How he did that, he said it was a perfect lap when he got into Parc Ferme. just one of those things. It was unbelievable, and it's a Ducati around Jerez as well, so that's not always been a good track. Although the last couple of years they have been doing pretty well there, but Pecco's lap was really, really mighty.
Yeah, I just want to go back to pre-season testing. They came there in early this year. I think it was maybe the first week of February, and it was red hot. The track had a racing line as wide as the track. It was rubbered in. It was brilliant, and he was doing these sort of laps that no one could get near him. And everyone thought, "Oh Jesus, the championship is over already. This guy is going to wipe the floor." And they've struggled since. And then we came to Jerez. He's had good form here. He's struggling small with his shoulder. He has admitted it's not perfect. It is a bit of a niggle in the back of his head. But then we got to qualifying, and my goodness, everyone all weekend was like, "Oh yeah, Fabio has this one. He just needs to show up, and it's a done deal." Rossi at Mugello all them years, Marquez in Texas. It's going to be the battle for second. Really, we're going to see that M1 just kind of take a couple of seconds out of his first 3 laps, and then we'll manage the gap to each other. But no, on Saturday, Pecco put the foot down, put in one of the best laps. You just see every season, you might see 2 or 3 qualifying laps where you go, wow, really, there's nothing anyone could have done about that. Most riders go, well, turn 1, I had to overtake Mir, and that cost me a tenth. I had to go a little bit wide in turn 16, that cost me a bit. Perfect lap. You don't hear him say perfect lap. You know yourself if you're riding. You just don't. You always feel like, well, could have been a bit more in the limit there. Well, maybe if I just apex that a little bit later, I could have got a better drive, and that could have gave me a tenth into the braking zone into turn 7. Oh, perfect lap. Oh, unbelievable. I watched it back a few times, and just the corner speed, and apparently, according to track spotters on the side of the track, it's all on corner entries making up his time, which is the riskiest because it's the easiest way to crash. But he's simply stunning. It's not a Ducati track. They can say it's better for the Ducati, but it's never going to be a Ducati track. It's all about corner speed, flow, and Ducatis never have been built like that. And the fact that they're able to do it now could be writing on the wall for the rest of the season. This could be the start of Pecco's season. First of all, his great qualifying and how his performance in the race was. But we'll have to wait a while to see a lap as good as that.
Yeah, I think we will. And then now we've said that, someone will do it next weekend. But yeah, it was. I've not seen anything like it for years. Like I said, no one's been on pole by that much for a while. Probably someone will pull out a stat saying, "Oh, it happened back in like 2020 at this weird like."
Oh, someone will bring up the Brno 2018 when Marquez was on pole by 2.1 seconds in a drying wet track. Yeah, we all know that one.
Oh, well, there you go. We don't even need someone in the comments to do it. Yeah. You've done it now.
Yeah.
But moving on to the race then now, I did also want to just give a shout out to Marc Marquez because he was nowhere all weekend really. I think in FB4 he was like 19th, so that's the race pace session. It's absolutely nowhere. But in the fight for the podium, was looking really good actually. I think probably the best I've seen him look on that new Honda. At Texas, of course, he was looking amazing, but he was looking a bit ragged there in some places because he was pushing so hard. But here he looked fairly comfortable until sort of the end when the tyres started to go off, but then that was the same for everyone, and he was hassling Miller all race. Managed to get in front of Miller, a beautiful move through turn 5 actually, and then re-lost the position again by losing the front in the last corner. So it was one of those things where it wasn't great for him, but he did manage to get the position back. But I thought it was a really good race for Marc Marquez because potentially last year would have thrown the bike away trying to get that podium, and obviously didn't quite get the podium in the end, but I thought it was just a good performance from him overall.
Yeah, all weekend long he was saying that, well, first of all, Friday he was basically running a lab bike where they were bolting on new bits. He said that Friday was just a write-off. He was trying new things. His pace wasn't there, and he was trying new things. Basically, he crashed in one of the free practice sessions, ruined his bike, and he went out on a second bike and he was seconds off just because he said it was set up for testing. It wasn't a representative bike of what I could do. Saturday, he did well to get a tow to get into Q2. I believe if he had to go through Q1, I don't reckon he would have made it. He was fortunate to be into Q2. Then in qualifying again, got a good tow. Again, used his experience, pissed off everyone. Jack Miller didn't care actually. Jack Miller actually kind of shook hands with him after the session and was like, "Yeah, you're welcome." As Jack towed him around to P5. Yeah, Jack's taxis. But he seemed to be getting the most out of the bike. From what I could see, pole was nowhere. Crashed once, I believe. Marquez obviously had them 2 crashes on Friday. A bit of, again, small crash in turn 6 and then fell off on a damp patch in turn 9. So again, silly little things, nothing serious. None of them were kind of on the limit. Bad crashes that, oh my god, I have no pace, I'm on the limit, I'm crashing everywhere. Just kind of a silly mistake. But in the race, he was expecting to be P6 to P10 was a good result. Now he got a good launch, managed to pass Taka and was in behind Jack for 15 laps before he made an overtake. And again, like you said, it was a brilliant move. It was a proper Marquez move. Just absolutely got the bike as low as he could, turned it tight, and also managed to get a good exit because Jack wasn't able to repass him into turn 6 into Danny Pedrosa, and probably would have got the podium if it wasn't for the final corner lock of the front, tuck the front, save it on the arm, because Aleix said, I was behind him all that race, I had about 3/10 a lap more, I couldn't pass him anywhere, it's something we need to work on. If it wasn't for the mistakes, I would have finished P5. So maybe he threw a small mistake, small error locking the front. He got in a bit hot, got out onto the unrubbered in track, the marbles, and the front just went straight away. He did so well to save it. That could easily have been end of race. Jack then got repassed into turn 1. So he went from 4th to 3rd to 5th in a matter of half a lap. And then he did manage to fight back past Miller into... What corner did he pass him in? It was into another turn 8, I believe it was.
Aspar corner?
Yeah, Aspar again, turn 8, just absolutely sent it up the inside. Miller kind of got surprised because he picked the bike up late and lost him all his corner speed, and Marquez managed to hold on. And in fairness, he did pretty much get the most out of that bike. The next Honda was P7, Taka Nakagami, and nowhere near his teammates. So Marquez again looking like he's trying to adapt the style to the bike. Tomorrow, which will be the day you're listening to, so Monday, there is another test there, and apparently Honda have a lot of things to test. So maybe Le Mans, usually Le Mans as well, again, like we said, colder temperatures, we could see a really quick Marc Marquez, and maybe the rest of the Hondas too.
Yeah, hopefully, because it's good to see all the manufacturers being at the top, and it looked so promising in pre-season, that Honda, but seems to have struggled so far, although I can't say it probably helps them when their test rider crashes 2 times in the race. It probably doesn't do them much good, but a good weekend for Marc Marquez. Let's talk about someone that had a poor weekend. Talk about Alex Rins. Once again, starting from right at the back of the grid, but this time he wasn't able to do his amazing first lap like he did at Portimao. I've seen the footage of that now. Obviously, last time we hadn't seen the footage yet of that first lap, but what an amazing move it was around the outside into turn 1. But sadly, this time he wasn't able to do the same thing, and then he lost the front through the quick rights. How he stayed on, I don't know. It's a very, very tricky corner, and it's a scary place to lose the front, but just didn't look like he was on it. Just looked like he was struggling all weekend, really.
Yeah, it was turn 11, which is Alex Crivier, the first ever MotoGP Spaniard champion, and it was where Alex Rins basically ended his 2020 title push in round 1.
Yeah, same corner.
He went through there, had an almost identical crash, except this time he didn't crash. He went through the corner, he lost the front, but because he has a weird riding style, he can kind of catch them. But this time, well, in 2020, it went, and he had to pick the bike up before he got to the gravel. As he picked it up, it kind of went the other way. He got thrown across it. There was a pretty good slow motion of him literally cartwheeling upside down, broke his left collarbone, and raced for the rest of the season injured. And that basically let his teammate win the championship. He would have been a good fight that year for the title. This year, exactly the same. Lost the front. It just started to slide, kind of two-wheel drift off. He managed to pick it up, ran through the gravel back to the back of the grid, fought his way back through, but all weekend long he looked like he was missing something. It's interesting to see because he's been the consistent man, which is ironic this year. Now, I was kind of happy he's brought it to the flag again, because I know as soon as he has his first crash, everyone's going to go, oh, Alex Rins is back, it was just a blip. And I do like Rins. I like watching him. He's a fabulous rider, and even with all his crashing, I still believe he's a great fit for Suzuki going forward. I think he seems to be a good development rider. He gets a lot out of the bike for them, so I hope he has a good round again in Le Mans. I don't want this to be a blip and a slow kind of downturn again. I hope that Le Mans, I hope he qualifies well, because that's 2 races in a row now where he's probably over the limit in Jerez because he had to. Well, he probably had nothing to lose starting last of a crash out of P16 trying to catch the points. I'm not going to get anything in here, so that's probably what happened. Maybe he learned something in the rest of the race for going forward on these really slick tracks with their high temperatures. But again, modern day MotoGP, you're not going to qualify last, and really you're not often going to qualify last and get a podium or top 5 or even a top 10. So that's his biggest issue now, is qualifying. If he has to get through to Q2 in Le Mans for a good race weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Modern day MotoGP qualifying is almost as important as the race now. You can't do what Valentino was used to do, not qualify too well and then still win the race anyway. You've got to start well and you've got to qualify well now. But we'll go back to the leaders now then. So obviously we spoke about Bagnaya's amazing pole lap, but he had an equally amazing race, really, along with Fabio Quartararo. They were in a league of their own. They were 10 seconds ahead of everybody else. Probably was even more than that by the end. I remember just seeing it was about 10 seconds towards the end of the race of that fighting trio behind with Aleix, Mark and Jack fighting over that third place. So a massive gap in qualifying, massive gap in the race. Beautiful race from Bagnaia. Didn't put a foot wrong. Fabio, to be fair, basically the same thing. He couldn't really get past because he was on the Yamaha. He couldn't, obviously, he'd lose the time on the straight. Not that there really is that much straight here at Jerez, but I mean, that's a couple of attempts he'd lose there. So he couldn't attack into Dani Pedrosa corner. And he couldn't really get past anywhere. Had to drop back to let his tyre cool down. But because Pecco had such good pace, their pace was so similar, he didn't have enough of an advantage to make the pass. Said it himself after the race. He knew if he didn't pass him in the first 3 laps, he was going to finish behind him. So fantastic race from both riders out the front. Bagnaia controlling it from the front. Bagnaia seems to be back now, like we said, with his qualifying lap. He's on it. GP22 seems to be working. Whether this is just a track-specific thing, because like you say, in the preseason, he was also super dominant at the circuit. So it might be just the fact that this bike works really well at this track. Guess we'll find out from now on. But it looks like Pecco's a bit more on it. Fantastic race from him and for Fabio as well.
Yeah. Tardozzi was interviewed by BT about an hour before the race, and he was asked by Neil Hodgson, is there new bits gone to the bike to help you get this? He smiled and said, no, we've just basically dialed the bike in. He said, with the new bike, you have to kind of go back to zero. You don't know what will work with it. So he said it's just taken a few rounds, a few weeks just to understand what works and what doesn't work for that bike. So again, it could be this track. They could have just covered all the cracks with we have a decent setup here. We had a pre-season here. We had this, that and the other. Le Mans, Ducati usually go well at. Dovi previously used to be quick around there. Obviously, Petrucci won there in the wet. It can be a bit of a stop-start track, which usually does suit the Ducati, so I would expect to see him quick there. Obviously, home race for Fabio. Fabio coming into this race weekend would have been thinking anything other than the win is a bad result, but his race was done on Saturday. Pecco risked it all on that qualifying lap, and I pretty much guaranteed him the win, barring a mistake from Pecco. It was kind of simple as that. Jerez, for all its amazingness and amazing layout and how fun it is to ride, it's not the best one for overtaking. Short straights, long flowing corners, you really need to have an advantage or be absolutely king, a Rossi or a Marquez type rider to be able to make overtakes at this track. It's just one of those places where you can get a Moto2 style race throughout the classes where the first 3 riders all have similar pace, but they can't really do anything with it. And again, Ducati in front of Yamaha is just a nail in the coffin for Fabio. He's not really going to make the overtake. We saw last year he crashed after winning the title a few times, trying to just prove to Yamaha, if I go for it, I end up in the gravel. And again today, he managed his front tyre as well. He put all the pressure on Pecco, but there just wasn't a way through from Pecco. Was faultless today and he was brilliant. He really deserved that win. It's great to see it now because this could just be that click. First win of the season for Pecco, he's done it Jerez. Now we're coming up to Mugello soon. Everything just starts to line up for Ducati. We were talking about how in Portimao that the M1 is working. Now we're going to get to Europe. We could see a stomp of race wins for Yamaha. Now a race later and we're like, oh well, Yamaha couldn't win because Ducati were on it. What if they're on it from now on? So again, each week we have a new story, we have a new kind of angle to go about. So it really, MotoGP at the moment is so good just because even now that we're into the European rounds, we're not like, oh well, the Ducatis were still 0.7 off. Fabio won again by a 15-second margin, 0.3 in qualifying, topped every session the weekend, had some in the back pocket. No, he was on the limit, couldn't get pole, lost the race, and we have a lovely title battle. So there's still a big gap at the front, but I wouldn't put it past Fabio having a few more bad races where the Yamaha is underpowered and the other way, the Ducati stomping away. The issue for Bagnaia is there's a lot more Ducatis out there that can beat him. Jorge Martin, Zarco on his day. Miller, I don't believe if he's in the position to fight for the title, that Pekov he's in the battle for the title. I don't think Jack will take points off him, but you just never know with this sport. So top two did brilliantly. Hats off to both of them. They were just head and shoulders above everyone else in this race.
Yeah, it was a great race. Hopefully that can be something we see going forward. I think now that we're into Europe, we are going to see people being more consistent at the front, and the GP22 seems to be picking up. But speaking of the bikes improving, I noticed this weekend that it seemed like some of the older bikes are struggling a little bit more. We had Bastianini and Bezzecchi were pretty close on track. Was that about the limit of the GP21? I think now that we're getting to this point of the season, a track where they've done lots of testing, are the new bikes starting to be a bit more dialed in than the old ones going to be a bit better? And could this be sort of the end of Bastianini's attempt at the championship? Because that's probably, it could set a bit of a trend. He's probably had his best races now. He's probably going to start finishing a little bit lower down on the older equipment.
Yeah, again, we come to a track that the new Ducati has done some testing, has a base setup of some sort, and it just shows that the new bike is just a step forward and it just needs to be dialed in. And now, from now on, basically this will be the trend that the full factory Ducatis, the GP22s, on most weekends, barring something special from a Bastianini, will basically be the Ducati to be on. Every year it happens. If you go back as far as 2014, 2015, 2016, if you looked at the satellite Tech 3 Yamahas, they always started the season quick. They always looked like they had something extra over the factory. Then we get the Jerez, then we get the Le Mans, and then they would just start to fade off. And throughout the season, it just happens every year. And again, we mentioned, I think 2 podcasts ago, I think before Portimao, we mentioned in Texas when he won, when there's the change of guard between the older bikes becoming less competitive compared to new bikes. Will he be able to still get a podium? Will he still be able to race at the top? This weekend proved that he can't. It'll be interesting to see going forward. Can he recover? Is he just having a bit of a blip? He did crash out of Portimao. Was he just trying to get points on the board today? It is interesting to see on the bike that won there last year, got a 1-2 for that fact, was all the way down. So again, that's another one we're going to have to watch for a few more races, see how Bastianini gets on. It'll be interesting to see where he finishes at Mugello up against the other Ducatis.
Yeah, that actually will be quite an interesting... It will tell quite a lot, because I suppose Mugello, you think it worked pretty well for the Ducati last year. You'd expect it to work even better this year. So yeah, that actually will be quite a good track to see it at. But there was another rider I wanted to give a bit of a shout out to. Well, not so much of a shout out, but Aleix yet again, just sort of under the radar, another podium. Remember last year when we were on about when will Aprilia get their first podium, sort of in the Premier class, and now it's not even weird that Aleix is there. Aleix is third place. It's like, oh, right, because he's won a race already. That's his third podium this season, I think, now. And he's just there being consistent. I've got some sort of Mir vibes going from him from 2020, and he's just there picking up points where everyone else is struggling. He's not really had a bad weekend, aside from maybe Austin. Austin was probably about the only weekend where he struggled, but he's been there or thereabouts, sort of top 5, top 10, on the podium most races. So Aleix, he could actually be a dark horse for the championship, which, if you'd said that, 3-4 months ago, you'd get laughed at probably. Like, I can't believe how good that Aprilia is. It's now lost its concessions with that podium. I'm not sure exactly how it works. I think they lose them at the end of the season, right?
Yeah, they keep them for the rest of the year. Yeah, they do.
That's how it works. So they've got to make the most of these concessions as they've got them. But whilst Aleix is doing well, where was Maverick today?
P14.
I think I looked at the end of the first lap and he was 20th.
Yeah.
So yeah,
he did finish in the points, but his teammate was on the podium. That says enough.
Well, your teammate's third and you finished 14th, which I suppose that's also kind of a problem at Yamaha. I don't think any of the other Yamahas were even in the points, were they? So again, that was not great for them. But yeah, Maverick, can't see him keeping that ride much more, because they hired him as the superstar rider that would bring the wins now that Aleix has developed the bike, and now it's Aleix doing the winning, Aleix getting on the podium. So I'm more and more impressed by Aleix as the season goes on. I would have thought he would have started dropping off by now after this weird start, but we're back in Europe, and that's another podium for him.
Yeah, a lot of people, they look at Elish, he had the forward Yamaha, he was on Pramac bike all them years ago. People forget he was riding Pramac.
Yeah, when he was first in MotoGP.
First when he first came up. He had a weird Yamaha, the forward Yamaha. He got a pole position on that.
Podium.
And the podium, jeez, yeah, I forgot about that. That was just a whole weird CRT thing.
That was a weird race though as well.
Yeah, that was Aragon 14?
2014, yeah, him and Crutchlope was a line.
Yeah, Marquez crashed, Danny crashed, Rossi crashed. So again, a bit of a weird one. But overall, people really doubted because he was beaten at Suzuki by Maverick. Inone looked better than him. So overall, he's always been like, oh well, he's not the best rider. Aprilia is not anywhere at the moment. If they're really going to go anywhere, they're going to need an alien or an A-level rider, and Elish isn't really that. He's a solid points man. But this year he's been on. It's hard to say if he's on his limit because he does not crash. I'm going to touch wood now because I really hope that he can continue this. He seems to be able to ride at such. Now, again, it could either be he is in the peak of his career, that Aprilia is suited so well to him that he can ride it the way he wants, but he seems to be able to ride at such a level. When I watch Elish, I don't go, oh, Jesus, he really looks like he's going to lose that front, that rear tyre is smoke, and he's going to drop back later. When I watch Miller or Marquez, every other Honda, I will go, oh, Jesus, this could end in the gravel here. There's some riders you watch and go, I don't know about this now. Oh, Alex Rins last year was one. Elish, for me, I watch him and I just like, yeah, he just looks so good. And that Aprilia is working so well for him. And to answer the second question, who will be there next season alongside him, I don't think it's going to be Maverick, because Maverick has come out and said they need to fix the bike on the opening laps. I can't ride it. That was the exact issues that he had.
Have we heard that before?
Exactly. That was the exact issues with Yamaha. And he went and tried to blow them up and said he'd rather retire than ride a Yamaha. You need to look inward at this point, and he has seen the coach or the mental coach, the sports psychologist, and apparently that's worked. But now he had pace for the top. He had the pace for the top 6 or so in free practice 4 and FP3, and then the race bad start. He's not a racer is the issue. He's a time trialer and he's a great tester, but there's a lot of people who could take that seat from him. If Miller doesn't re-sign with Ducati, imagine Miller on the Aprilia. That would be something to watch. I was thinking,
yeah, that would be good actually.
I was thinking if Rins had a bad season this year, he could maybe have shipped off to Aprilia. You could maybe throw Aaron Canada on it. You could throw a lot of people on that bike. That bike is hot property now.
Yeah, it's a bike people actually want to ride now.
Yeah, unlike a couple of years ago when Joe Roberts was offered it and he said, no, I'd rather stay in Moto 2. But now he's ruined his decision. But again, Maverick has pace on that bike. He can ride it quick. He does look good on it, to be fair. I do love watching Maverick. His riding style is lovely. I love the way he gets his whole body off. But points are given out for Sunday, and Sunday is the day he doesn't show up. He isn't there. And there's nothing pointing, okay, it's only a blip. This is just Maverick for the last 5 years. Can't do it on a Sunday.
Yeah, basically, as soon as he got off the Suzuki, I actually assume that probably once it gets announced he's leaving, he'll win a race then. Because it'll already be too late. Just one of those things, I think, just in his head, when he already knows it's over and he's not under pressure anymore,
yeah, he
might perform. But either way, yeah, it's not coming together for Maverick. It doesn't look good for his career because you can't imagine anybody's going to really want to sign him, because what's the point? Because you've seen what he's done on 2 different bikes, and it's just, yeah, right. If you want to be top of the test day champions, if you want a good headline for your sponsors after the test, fair enough. But you're not going to hire somebody for that. So, yeah, I can't really see Viñales probably being in MotoGP beyond this season, to be completely honest. But that's pretty much this weekend summed up then. So we'll take a quick look forward to Le Mans. Obviously, we have been referencing it throughout, trying to sort of say what we think people are going to do. But it's usually a bit of a strange weekend, Le Mans. A lot of the time there's a bit of rain. It's usually a bit cold. So there's the potential for a flag-to-flag. There was a flag-to-flag there last year, of course. And then lots of different bikes sort of work there. The Yamaha seems to work pretty well there. Well, I assume Fabio will work there. The other Yamahas, they're not going to be anywhere. The Ducatis worked well there in the past. Marquez has gone there pretty well last year. He was going pretty well there. I think that was slightly down to the conditions, but if it is cool, the Honda seems to work a little bit better in the cooler conditions. So we'll see. It could be a little bit of a strange weekend. What are your sort of predictions going into this weekend?
Yeah, as you're listing out, the Yamahas do well, Quattararo go well, the Ducatis, the Honda with Marquez with more grip, and then I was thinking, yeah, you could throw Suzuki into that mix.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot Suzuki.
You could throw Suzuki, and then you go, geez, yeah, you could throw Lation, and then you go, geez, if Brad Binder qualifies well, he might do have. Again, the KTMs, we haven't really talked about them much this year. They seem lost. Now that we're getting into the European zones again, they seem to have their same issues where they can't qualify and their race pace is not good enough to go from P18 to P6, P7. So they have work to do. Other than that, I see every other manufacturer in 2 weeks' time being strong. I think Fabio has a point to prove. Home Race has never won it. Has come close before. Has had some brilliant rides there. Last year in the West in that flag to flag was brilliant because it's the Yamaha since 2015, 2016. Basically, since they went to the Magneti Marelli, they have not won a race in the rain. The last wet race they won was Rossi at Silverstone 15. So,
wow,
they really don't get on with the wet. They can't ride in it. So, if there's rain, I would throw money on Jack Miller. Again, he won during the rain last year, and that's just come to my mind as I said that, but I reckon Miller in the rain could do something special there. Keep an eye on the Ducatis. Now, obviously, it's way too early to tell what the weather will be like, but it's probably not going to be sunny all 3 days. Usually, Le Mans, it's cold of a Friday. You see 100 crashes in turn 3 over the whole weekend. So, again, look out for turn 3. And everyone but the KTMs are probably going to be rapid.
To be honest, if it rains, Oliveira might be up there.
Yeah, exactly.
He won at Mandalika and he showed in Portimao when it was raining, he was going pretty well. But
Yeah.
that's probably a topic for another podcast, the KTM and the whole situation with their riders going on there. There's stuff going on with Ralph Fernandez behind the scenes and probably Oliveira as well by the looks of it. So that's probably something to discuss in a different podcast. But that rounds out this episode. So I hope you have enjoyed that one. If you're watching on YouTube, do give the video a like, or if you're on Spotify, do rate the podcast 5 stars. It does really help us out in sort of both the algorithm, sort of getting around to other people. But hope you have enjoyed that one. I've been Rhys, and we'll see you in the next episode.